Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/307, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 307th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney, and welcome to the final edition of the Empire State Trail Tour. I know, maybe a little bit of a surprise? Well, listen on, gentle listener, or whatever. Looming storms, transportation question marks, and some subtle messages from a ligament in my knee all pointed to one thing. This phase of the tour was coming to a conclusion, but one more bit of adventure awaited to share with you. Plus, come on back after. We're going to do some takeaways.
Good morning from Troy, New York. And we are going to call an audible here. The weather for the next several days looks not good. And I am starting to develop a little bit of a tweak in my right knee. It's probably a saddle thing. It's probably not as big of a deal. But overall, my energy levels are really shot right now. And I am not feeling great physically. My bike lights are not working. I don't know why. I'm just getting a lot of stuff thrown at me. And it's not like I couldn't fix these things. But there's something about sort of being here at this junction that I feel like I can come back on this one. It has been a remarkably great week in terms of what I've been able to accomplish. I've now done the entire Erie Canal section of the Empire State Trail. And what I'm thinking is, it was always bothering me at that junction that I was only going to be able to do part of the north-south section. And maybe what I think I'm going to do is come back and do from New York City to the Canadian border. I think that's the better way to complete the Empire State Trail. I've done the east-west. Now let's do the north-south as a separate one. It also just sort of fits into kind of where my brain's at right now, where I think I'm physically at, and everything around that. So, Empire State Trail, part 1 is complete. Part 2, let's look for that in 2023. So because I have called it early and I have to get to the airport, there's a bunch of different questions here. Number one, what's the best route? What's the best way to get home? Things like that. Factoring into my decision here was also the fact that the trains are starting to become less predictable about their ability to carry bikes. I just read this morning that the line that serves the CNO has its bike service suddenly suspended. If I ended up getting to New York City and it was suspended, I would have been back to where I was at the beginning of the week for you months ago with the question mark about whether or not the trains were going to be running at all. Of course, this time it would be different because the buses would be running and it would be a possibility of getting back. But just after all this, there just seemed to be so many degrees of difficulty that were hitting me in these last few days that I was just like, you know what? It's just not, it got to the point where it was like, this is much more work than it is fun. So here I am. It's still raining outside and it's getting colder. So I am only 6 miles away. I could conceivably end up looking to get a ride share that could handle the bike, but that probably would cost me as much potentially as the rental car itself. It's going to get me all the way back home. So I am going to give this a shot. I've got the rain gear. It's only 45 minutes. It's a lot better than doing 6-7 hours of riding and then having to set up a tent somewhere while trying not to be seen. Other challenges, my bike lights. Did I say this before? My rear bike light is now firing off for no good reason. Like it will turn on and stay on and then run through blink cycles and then will eventually turn off. It's not working, so I don't really have good bike lights for a more robust adventure down the road. So whenever all is said and done, this is the right call. The rain is letting up a little bit now. My checkout is within a half hour. I feel like between 11 and noon is a decent window. It should take me 45 minutes. I think it's going to take me an hour to get to the airport because I also haven't done any of the scouting. I don't know any of the scenarios. The phone may be wet. It's going to be a thing. So we're going to give this the best shot we can with the adventure mindset that we've got and see what we can do. Because once we get to the airport, all right, cool. I even made it so my rental wasn't until 1 o'clock. So I've got time on that end to change clothes if I need to. If the line is really long at the rental counter, then I've got time for that too. So we're going to make this work. It's just going to be, patience is going to be something that I'm going to need to practice, and patience. Yeah, we're going to go with patience. All right, more to come, probably not from the road, just because of the nature of the rain and the situation, but certainly in the airport. I wish I was there right now.
From just outside of Albany, New York, in the rental vehicle. A couple of things. A final note for the journal entry. Holy smokes, it's hilly in Albany. I had to, in my ride, climb up and back up over Colony, New York. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Before I went and got back to the airport. So it was a very strenuous ride. Google Maps says it should have taken me 45 minutes. It was raining for a good chunk of it, not all of it. I'm grateful that I timed it the way I did. But it was a climb. And in parts very steep. Just like it was on the way into Colony from the west side and the glorious downhills that I experienced yesterday. On the east side, I got to go up them again. So I got to climb the crazy hills in and around the Albany area twice. And are they particularly crazy compared to other places? They were just much steeper than what I was used to with the rest of the week. So there was that. A couple of things on all of this as I wrap up the Empire State Trail Part 1, as I will call this. I think that I made the right call just from the mental point of view. Also, not only peeked ahead at the weather in my app going south, and because of the nature of this rain, it was another all-day rain. And so I just really am glad that I made the call when I did, rather than just do what I usually do, which is hero up and just say, oh, don't want to quit. I have, as you all know, ended tours before on many occasion, but I've also gutted through a bunch of them when things were not quite as fun. And this one, I was just sort of done. A pain in my knee was there, and now it's much better now that it's gotten suppressed. I think that if I had more flexibility, or it was in a different point in the tour, would have just taken a 0 and then just waited for the drier weather behind this front. So, but I just didn't really have that capability. It was much better. I was in a much better place to end the tour rather than to be in this weird no man's land overnight tonight, where I didn't have really good shelter options. There were hotels and a few other things that were 40-ish miles down the road, which would have been fine, but they just weren't ideal, and they were on the more expensive side. And I just was sort of really hoping to be able to do some stealth camping on this trip, but conditions just didn't really allow for that. And that's happened before, and I'm sure it'll happen again. But I was also a little mentally checked out on this. And so when that happens, I think that it's smart to just say, you know what, it's cool. I've had a wonderful week, a great tour, and I get a couple of bonus days to sort of relax through the weekend. And then I go back to work on Monday, and I'll go back to work refreshed rather than exhausted. And I think that just all of the great memories that I made, and I think documenting how great this trail is from Buffalo to Albany, I really hope that I've done a service to all of you to underscore how great that Empire State Trail really is. And I'm really looking forward to part 2ing this, if I may turn part 2 into a verb, and look at the idea of going up to New York and then doing a ride up to the Canadian border. and then trying to figure out how the hell I get home. Or maybe I do it the other way around. I don't know, but that's going to be some fun research over the fall and into the winter. So, did this go the full route as planned? Absolutely not. But do I consider this still a success? Absolutely. I feel really good about the choices that I made. I think that a lot of times things are outside of our control when we're doing a road trip of this type, a bike tour of this type. And you got to be prepared for it. And sometimes, as I was prepared, I had the stuff. I had a full set of dry clothes. Everything was dry and ready to. My trick of putting stuff into the not so dry bag, I'm sure would have worked. But the rain, and then the other thing that I encountered today, the wind. The headwinds I got yesterday were really debilitating. They were probably another 10 miles per hour harder today. And I think that would have been a really tough thing to do. Again, when I'm sort of a little more mentally checked out compared to other times, yeah, it was a good choice. And I'm dry and happy and all of that, and have memories of a really good tour. I think that it ended up working out really well. And it leaves me yet another tour to sort of tack on to. And that's what the theme has been this year, hasn't it? A tour that I want to do and complete. Something happens and I'm not able to complete it. And I don't say, oh, I failed. It just means I got something to go back and do. And that's definitely the case here too.
Statistics. Miles biked, 8. Airports traversed, 2, including returning the car. Minutes of ride recorded, for some reason, 0, and flats, 0. All right. This would have been too short of an episode, and I didn't want to do a separate one for takeaways, but I wanted to do takeaways. So we're kind of mashing it all together here in one slot. Before I get to the takeaways, though, I do want to mention that as you probably heard at the end of last week's episode, I really pretty much came in rolling into Troy intending to keep on going. But just after I got checked into that hotel, as I talk about, things just really spoke to me in a way that said, you know what, this is it. We're going to close it out here. And I really do intend to go back to finish up the north-south portion of that trip. And maybe even if I can pull it off, depending on just kind of logistics and a bunch of other things, maybe even do kind of a New York to Montreal kind of a thing, or at least a New York to the Canadian border kind of a thing. So more to come on that, and we'll talk more about that sometime early next year as we start talking about some of the tours that I'm looking at for 2023. I already have one figured out. That will certainly be revealed and will probably not be much of a surprise to folks, but this one's definitely in the running for next year. So very excited about all of that. All right, now takeaways. I've got 8 of them. Because I am not into round numbers at this point in my life. I don't know why. Number 1, by the way, these are in no particular order. Number 1, the Empire State Trail is truly one of the great routes in the U.S. I think that one thing that I have noticed, that I did notice, not only while riding, but also re-experiencing the ride by putting these together for you all over the course of the last few months, is that New York State has done a tremendous job with the Erie Canal portion. It was fine before. It was great in parts, in fact. Now I think it is a really, really excellent route. Up there with all of the other great ones that I've ridden and have not yet ridden throughout the U.S. I think it's fantastic. I think it should be something that you should check out. I'm really excited to check out the Hudson Valley portion and then, of course, the North Country portion. Now, I know that those are going to be a little different. They're set routes, but they're much more road-based than the trails that I was on for the Erie Canal portion. So I'm super excited to check it all out, but I do really think New York State has done an amazing job and brought the Empire State Trail up with the Gap and the C&O and the Kiddie Trail and all of the other ones that we talk about somewhat incessantly on this program. Number 2, for takeaways. Thank you, local bike shops, for swooping in to save the day. I only needed one of you on this trip. But like past trips, I had a problem. I had a big problem. That was, of course, I had to replace my tire. And I still wish I understood how my tire wore down so completely. And you saw the pictures. If you check out the pictures in the show notes from, I believe that was the day 1 episode, or maybe the day 2. It was stunning, because I did give the tire a once over. I don't know how that happened. I didn't have a sense that it was worn down at all, but obviously it was. There was no rubbing. There was no nothing. I still very puzzled. But thankfully, Brockport, New York had a bike shop, and that bike shop was, when they opened, they got there eventually. They had what I needed. And it was the difference between, having to, figure out a way to get from Brockport to someplace else and, get a ride or whatever and wait on an Amazon to deliver a tire or check out another bike shop. It was just nice that literally the bike shop that was, a short little stumble away from my campsite was available there. And another good reason to support your local bike shops, because thank goodness that there was that one in Brockport, and they saved my butt, and they saved this tour, and really didn't end up delaying it all that much, to be perfectly honest, maybe by a few hours, but it was just different in kind rather than in the actual tour that was going to be happening. So number 3, kind of a corollary. Thank you, trail towns that provide such great amenities. Now, we're in Brockport. Let's talk about Brockport. What a great setup they have, where you can camp. You've got the shower there. You've got, I believe they have laundry, if memory serves. They had a really great setup, and so many of those canal trail towns had something similar to or equivalent to that. Some of them didn't have quite the same kind of setups, but there's plenty of opportunities in a lot of these towns. And I think for many of those situations, the best thing to do is to check out that particular town's website. Also, just roll up and ask. There definitely seems to be facilities for folks that are using boats along the canal. So I suspect that because they allow overnights by the boats, they also would potentially allow overnights by folks on bikes. So ask in any given town, call ahead, find out what you can. You can always talk to the local police. They usually very much know what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. One thing that I found very interesting is how many folks in the towns that I've gone to where there are amenities like this, they don't know that that's offered. I actually remember a particular story that I haven't quite fully shared, but I was in another town and the police didn't know that a local facility was offering camping. So it was just sort of like, sometimes you won't get the correct answer from some of the people that you ask, but ask around and see what you can find. Always, of course, best to ask the folks that actually own the property that you're going to be on, or managing the property that you're on. But bottom line, these trail towns do immensely great work, and I'm really grateful for what they offer there. Just a lot of good stuff that's available there, and big shout out to Brockport, New York in particular, for being an excellent trail town. Number 4, airports. I continue to love riding to or from them directly. Been doing it for a few years now, whereas before I was always a little, I don't know, I worried because airports, let's be honest, are not built for bicycles, unless they are. And when Portland's airport was starting to be much better for bicycles, and National Airport in DC here, DCA, started to do a little bit more because of the local trails that were nearby, that started to get me thinking about other airports. And what I have found is, even if there isn't a direct bicycle amenity, there isn't a trail that is designed all the way up to the airport, I have been finding that even some of the worst design airports, hello Buffalo, have the ability to kind of figure it out, in a reasonably safe way. So, I'm sure there are much more urban designed airports where it wouldn't be all right. I'm thinking of maybe Dulles Airport or something like that, where it's literally highways that go into it. But even Tampa Airport, I've experienced, had good experiences with. Of course, because we're talking about in the context of this trip, we had 3 separate airports that were involved here. So let's see here. I knew that I had 3. I picked up my car, not at an airport, but I went to Buffalo Niagara International Airport. It worked. It wasn't terrific, but I only had to cross one road that was kind of to be able to get out of there. So that worked out just fine. I, of course, ended up riding to Albany Airport. You just heard about that. That actually worked out pretty well. There was one honk I got, but it was just somebody being nervous in LA. Even I wasn't like moving, I was waiting on traffic, but for whatever reason, they decided to honk at me to say, "Hey, I'm here," which I knew you were there. Let's see. So that was Albany, and then of course I rode out of DCA with my folding bike. Because, was it my folding bike? No, actually, it was the full-size bike. It was the same bike that I had been riding after I dropped off the car at National Airport. So 3 separate airports on this trip, and they all worked out great. It's really fun to be able to bike in or out of an airport if that's part of your transportation for your tour. So airports, love them. Love riding to or from them. Number 5, I hate calling tours early, but I'm glad I get to ride when I can. I kind of opened up this section of the takeaways with the whole concept of calling it early. And I always feel a little bad because I always promised you all that I'm going to be doing these rides. And I feel like that on numerous occasions I have called tours early or done something different. And it's interesting because I do hear back from some of you saying, "Hey, thank you for sharing the stuff that goes kind of sideways," because that's real. And that's sort of the idea here is, I've always been about what's real in bicycle touring and bicycle travel. So yeah, I would rather do a tour that gets scuttled or that I have to bail out of or that I decide is over before my original plan, so long as I get to do what I want of it. And that's kind of the bottom line with all of that. Number 6. When you deviate from routes, this is a pro tip one. When you deviate from routes, make sure to pay attention to what side of rivers you ride and where you're going to. And parentheses, we're relying on bridges an awful lot as cycling travel cyclists. So in the same exact spot near Savannah, New York, I ran into a problem in 2 separate rides because 2 separate bridges were out. And the first time it was because I was ignorant as to where I was really going to end up. I ended up at a campsite that thankfully was on the side of the river that I was on. I was trying to get to one of the locks to try to camp for free at them. Well, it turns out that one, you can't do it. At least from my vantage point, I couldn't figure out a place where you could go. Now, maybe the operators would let you do it, but they probably, best guess, would say, there's literally a campsite on the other side of this bridge. Go there is probably what they would tell me, or tell anyone. So on this particular trip, I was designing to go to that particular campsite that I was luckily on the same side of the river of last time when there was a bridge outage. Now, completely separate bridge outage, and I had to do a big roundabout route. Well, I subsequently looked at a map, and I realized I really should have stuck with the route that I did back in 2015, and I wouldn't have had the big workaround and whatever. And it was just kind of a silly routing that had me cross the canal. I think it was the canal or the river. I can't remember, one of the two, twice to get back to the campground. And that ended up creating a bigger problem because I had to do a big loop around the outage of the second bridge that I was really banking on. So ultimately, that was a failure on my part. That was a failure to take a bigger picture look and just kind of rely on, it was some combination of Google Maps and Ride with GPS that had me do this kind of back and forth cross. Now, granted, we should always assume that the bridges are always going to be there. But what I've learned on this trip is you really want to avoid extra crosses of rivers, streams, whatever, when you can avoid them. And I very much could have avoided it because this was a roll your own portion of the route. I was not on New York State Bicycle Route 5. I was not on the Erie Canal towpath. I was not on the Empire State Trail. This was a roll your own part to get to this campground. And so, lesson learned, make sure that you're not needlessly crossing rivers, because when you do that, if there's an outage, that could throw everything awry. And that's what happened with me. It worked out fine. It wasn't that much extra mileage, but at the end of the day, with rain and everything, it was not what I needed. So that was number 6. Number 7, keep your electronics dry, even if they can get wet. This was this was just dumb on my part. I have to be honest. And it ended up costing all of you, I think, a little bit as well. So much bad audio, or at least worse audio, I found later on in the tour. In fact, there was a lot of stuff that you did not end up hearing because it was just so bad that it just wasn't listenable. I was able to rescue quite a bit of it, and I think that most of it was pretty listenable, but it's just wasn't great. But the thing that was really, I don't want to say dangerous, but off-putting, while I was in Syracuse, leaving Syracuse for the last part of that very long day, I believe that was day 4, if memory serves, I could not operate my phone. And when you are relying on your phone for turn by turn and a few other things as well, that can be really problematic. Touchscreens do not work in the rain at all. And it's hard to get your screen dry in the middle of a driving rainstorm, even if you have something to dry it off with. First of all, it gets wet right away anyways. Second of all, that thing that was dry doesn't stay very dry at all. So yeah, be real mindful of your reliance on screens in the rain, and also be very careful. I could have lost the phone through a short potentially, because it when I was trying to charge it when it was down to nearly nothing, there were problems with it. So really the bottom line here is, pretend your phone is from the early, we'll say the mid to late 2000s, when it was like really dramatically bad if any water got anywhere near it. It's much better if you treat it that way, because if a little water gets at it, don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen. But your ability to use it is much better the drier you can keep it. So keep those electronics dry, even if they can get a little wet. All right, last but not least, this is number 8. Find your edge. This is a yoga thing. You may recall I used to work for a yoga studio, my lovely partner's yoga studios, back in the day when she owned one. There's a concept in yoga about finding your edge. That's sort of like your limit, but not the limit where it's pain, but the limit to where you really end up pushing yourself. You achieve things. And I really found my edge in a few different ways on this ride. The biggest one, though, I thought, was that really long day in the rain. That was kind of tough. I knew that I had bailout points. I didn't act recklessly. I knew that I could have gotten a ride, or I could have stayed in Syracuse and gotten a hotel that night and canceled the other one. I could have done any of a variety of things. I think I could have used transit for a little bit of a fast forward in there. But, I was sort of like, okay, I knew at any given point as the rain was coming, I've got the ability to keep riding. And, so long as I'm doing this safely, this long day push, because of course it was well up into the mid to upper 70 mile range. I think when it was at 77 at the end of the day, that ended up pushing me very much. In other contexts, I've been in much better shape. A 77-mile day would have been more kind of like a laugh it off kind of a thing. This time that was a lot. That was a lot for me. But it worked, and I did it. And I was able to roll into that hotel on the bike, and I didn't rely on any of the bailouts or any of the backup plans or anything like that. That was my edge for that day and for this trip. And I'm really grateful that I was able to do it. I did a lot of smart things to get myself prepared for it, and it was a good story, I hope. And I'm looking forward to being in better shape next year, so that edge is maybe a little bit further in other ways. But find your edge. You will be rewarded for that in your bicycle tours. It doesn't mean you should find your edge every single day. It doesn't mean you shouldn't take 0 days. It doesn't mean that maybe you shouldn't have a casual tour sometime. Casual tours are fun, but the ones where you push yourself to kind of where your limits are, so long as you do it in a non-reckless way, in a smart, calculated way, it's fun. It makes for a better tour. All right, so that's it for takeaways on this particular trip. Thank you for hanging out with us for the Empire State Trail. As threatened / promised, I think that there's going to be a phase 2 of this one, because I would like to do something with New York City. I would love to do that section of the Empire State Trail that I was planning on doing. We're looking at that for maybe 2023. Look for more info on that coming at you next year. We also, as I mentioned before, got some plans already for 2023 coming up. I'm super excited to share those with you, but we get to tie a ribbon around 2022 next week with our year-end special. So thanks so much for joining me this year for this episode, for this tour. I really appreciate it and looking forward to doing some more with you. Happy holidays, everyone. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, and Sam Scruggs. And thanks also to all past and anonymous folks who are helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.